Monday, January 10th, 2022, Maneko 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today we're going to look at the question of whether governments can help the general public fight the cost of living crisis. And why did I laugh? Well, because it's like asking a drug dealer to help you clean up. In my opinion, that's the best analogy I have really for it. Or maybe even to ask a burglar to set up the alarm system in your house so he knows where all the traps are, right? But before I look into that, though, I like to just point out that we had some very good news, in my opinion, today coming from Australia, and that's the fact that Novak Djokovic won the appeal as an Australian court quashes visa cancellation, so he'll be able to play in the Australian Open. Is that why it's a great thing? No, it's far bigger than just a tennis tournament, and the fact that he's got a record Grand Slam victories alongside Spanish tennis player Nadal and the Swiss player Federer. They've got, all of them have 20. He's won 9 Australian Opens, but he's from Serbia. And if you look at his Wikipedia, he was born in May of 1987. So at the time, that was Yugoslavia. And Yugoslavia, of course, was a communist dictatorship for 50 years or so. Under, I think it was Marshal Tito, that was the guy. And so maybe he doesn't remember that well, because when things kicked off in that part of the world in the early 90s, he would have been maybe 6 or 7. But I'm sure his father has spoken a lot about how they used to live under communism. And I'm not surprised that he stood up for his individual rights. Novak Djokovic, he could have just done what Nadal did. Oh, I believe the vaccine companies, I believe the doctors, I believe the governments, and I took it, right? Let's hope Djokovic meets Nadal sometime during the Australian Open. I think it starts today. And let's hope Djokovic beats him 6-love, 6-love, 6-love. So well done, Novak. I think this is going to have huge repercussions all around the world. We'll have to see. But he stood up. He didn't take the medical procedure. He followed the rules. The federal government in Australia tried to stop him, but the courts decided in his favor. So that's what I wanted to just tell you before we go into the cost of living crisis. So I know under Ronald Reagan, he talked the talk, I have to admit, but what happened in the 8 years of his administration was not really good in terms of the debt. And actually government got bigger, I would say, because the more debt the government gets, it means the government is spending more than it takes. But he did say in his inaugural address, and I quote, "Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem." So why didn't he follow his beliefs? Well, that's a topic and a subject maybe for another video. We know that Ronald Reagan was shot just after he was inaugurated a few months later by a guy called John Hinckley, whose father was a very good friend of George Herbert Walker Bush. So maybe that was a signal. Who knows? I'm just going to stop at that. But anyway, I saw this article yesterday in the Daily Mail. It says, "Save us from the cost of living crisis, Boris. Senior Tories increase pressure on Prime Minister to head off pain of soaring energy bills and tax rises or face backlash at the polls. So before I go forward, I'm going to reference a book that I have referenced or recommended, really. I'm going to recommend it and reference a small section here as well before I start looking into this question of whether government can really help. And it's called The Law by Frederick Bastiat. And he wrote The Law. Here it is. You can find a free PDF online. I'm going to put a link below in the description. So The Law is the classic blueprint for a just society. So we're going to go through the inside jacket, what they say about this book. Or it's not really long. It won't take you long to read it. It's not even 80 pages. It says, it's impossible to introduce into society a greater change and a greater evil than this, the conversion of the law into an instrument of plunder. France of 1850 was in political turmoil in the aftermath of the Revolution of 1848. The tide of socialism was sweeping the nation. One man stood alone against the tide. The precocious son of a merchant, Frederick Bastiat, devoured the writings of free trade economists such as Adam Smith, Jean-Baptiste Say. Rejecting the popular notions of his day, Bastiat began to speak and write against ideas he believed were undermining natural harmonies of interest among men. First as an orator and essayist, later as a member of the Legislative Assembly, he became known for withering logic and devastating wit. He also became isolated politically. Think of Ron Paul, I would say. I'm sure Ron Paul has read The Law. The struggle between left and right was for power and plunder. So there you go. Left and right, it doesn't matter who's in power. Yet, Bastiat believed that the only purpose of government was to guarantee individual rights and freedom. Well, I think Novak Djokovic knows about that. The state, he declared, and perhaps his most memorable epigram, is that great fiction by which everyone tries to live at the expense of everyone else. So this is what's happening, not just here in the UK, it's also happening everywhere around Western Europe, North America, even Australia and New Zealand. So in 2020, our governments, most of our governments, not in Sweden, decided to shut everything down. It's the first time in the history of the world that governments shut down society, destroyed businesses, and at the same time, they asked their central banks to basically create all this fake currency or fake money, if you want to call it, out of thin air to lend to the government so that the governments could pay the public to stay at home and do nothing. It was done in quantities that really some years ago would have been unimaginable in terms of a percentage of GDP. And I mean, I've been telling people even before that, ever since '08, that this was going to come home to roost, this inflation. And what the government has done, they've spent money or credit from future generations, but it's already starting to cost us. And how does that work? Well, inflation is basically when you create this money and credit out of thin air, and the only entities that can do that really are government and the central banks, because they have the legal power. They have the monopoly to do that. I can't just go out and start creating money out of thin air and paying people. They're not going to accept it. I have to actually earn something of value to pay people with, but governments don't. And that's how they dilute our currency, and that's why prices are rising. Prices are not rising because of greedy energy companies or greedy producers or anything like that. government and the central bank, they're the ones solely responsible for inflation, but you're going to hear them blaming other people for it. And that's why I think the definition of inflation is so important. It's not the rising prices. It's the consequence we're suffering right now. And the other thing it's done, it's disrupted the whole just-in-time inventory economy that we have all around the West. We don't keep, in the old days, I guess maybe 40, 50 years ago, inventory, businesses, small businesses kept inventory for months. They didn't like have to have people deliver twice a week like they do now in the small shops by trucks. And it's disrupted everything. We've seen the shortage of truck drivers or HGV drivers in the UK. So they created this crisis, and you might ask, well, they had to shut down the economy. Well, I personally don't think so. And Sweden is proof of that. And I wrote something about that back in the middle of December, and I put it in my blog, which I do publish a few articles there once in a while, and I'm going to put it below in the description. And I've compared what happened in Sweden and what's happened in the UK. It's entitled Extraordinary Popular COVID-19 Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. So go look at that. And I use the numbers that are public government numbers. I would say the deaths are actually a lot lower from that disease, but I think they're accounting it with, right? But that's all I wanted to say. But I wanted to use the official numbers just to prove the point that they didn't need to lock the country down. And the other thing that resulted from all this madness in 2020, where governments shut us down, aside from people losing their jobs and getting used to, some people got used to, of course, with furlough, to be at home and getting paid. That was really nice. Doing a lot of stuff at home. It was nice, of course, but we're paying the price for that now. So to think that government can actually help us get out of that, as I said earlier, it's like asking a drug dealer to help you go Turkey or clean yourself up. You would go to actually somewhere else for help, not the person who's created the problem. So the other problem that's been created is that the government gave out all these loans through the banks, and these loans, they're called bounce back loans. They were guaranteed by the government, you see, by us, the taxpayer. And I spoke about this many months ago, but I found the article, and this is from December 2020, so over a year ago. It says, a giant bonfire of taxpayers' money, fraud in the UK pandemic loan scheme. And it says here, this is from the FT, the bounce back plan offered a lifeline to struggling companies, but more than half of the 43 billion lent so far could be lost. So this is the kind of institution people are asking to help them. The institution that wasted billions and billions upon billions of our own future earnings. And they've done it through, they're going to do it through taxation and through inflation, of course. Rising prices are just the way we pay for all this. So, yeah, it says, senior Tories mounting pressure on Prime Minister to head off pain of soaring energy bills and tax rises, or face backlash at polls. The Prime Minister will hold talks with his Chancellor this week amid a devastating squeeze on living standards created by them, I would say. So, yes, if they don't increase national insurance taxes, it will help. But all that will do, it's going to put the government more and more in the red. It's going to create more and more inflation, which will result in more and more rising prices. So the more they do, the worse it's going to get. It says 3 select committee chairmen last night said failure to take decisive action could see support for the conservatives collapse. And it's pretty, it's pretty funny when you hear what people are saying. And of course, they're politicians. It says here, their interventions came after Lord. He's a Lord. Lord Frost, the former Brexit minister, told the Mayo on Sunday that the Prime Minister risks losing the next election unless he returns to Tory values of free markets, free debate, and low taxes. So, free markets, really? The Tories who continued the Labour policy of bailing out the banks after the '08 crisis. Yeah, I know the crisis was during the Labour government, but they kept all the deficit spending to help the banks and keep the system going. They're the ones who shut the economy and told people to stay at home. That's very free market. They're the ones who borrowed about 15%. As you can see here, 15% of the economy in 2020. Is that a free market activity? No. And so, unfortunately, the more they do, the worse it's going to be. And there's a lot of people out there who are suffering, of course. And I realize that people at the bottom, the working, the working class, the blue collar workers, so to speak, and they're going to want help, but they don't realize that the more help that they get, the worse it's going to get. The people it's going to help are going to be, again, the bankers. And why is that? Well, because for the government to help, they'll have to borrow more, even more. And every penny the government borrows goes through the books of the bankers, and they take a cut. So, as Ronald Reagan said before he was compromised or someone coerced him into going the other way, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. And as Frederick Bastiat said, the state is that great fiction by which everyone tries to live at the expense of everyone else. And I would say we're learning that the hard way now. And hopefully, and I don't think that will happen, unfortunately. I think they will try to help people, which seems like the right thing to do, but it's not. It's not in the medium to long term. It will backfire. When they bailed everyone out in 2020 through lockdowns, bounce back loans, I said it here on this channel. It's going to create a massive inflation, which will result in higher prices, and it's going to make things even worse. So the best thing government can do is basically get off our backs, stop telling us what to wear on our faces, stop telling us what app we need to have on our phones, and let us live our lives, and let us take the risk that every time we walk out of the house, yes, we can be hit by a bus, we can be hit by lightning, and we can die. But don't stop treating people like children, and then maybe the economy will get better. But it won't get better until that happens. So am I negative about what's going on? No, but because I want to try to inform the public that not to depend on government and depend on themselves. And I think that's the most positive thing you can do. So with that, after all the ranting, we're going to look at where the markets are this morning. We are a little later today, Billy and I. It's 9:23 a.m. London time. So let's see where gold and silver are this morning. We've got gold up slightly. My system says half a dollar. 1797.35. We're right near the highs. 1798 has been the high. The low has been 1791. Silver is up 6 cents or 1/4% at 22.42. Right near the highs as well of 22.45. Low has been 22.18. Dow futures up 30. Nasdaq up 10. And S&P up 4 FTSE future up 4 points. To the currencies, sterling is unchanged, 135.95. The euro is down about 0.2%, 113.36. The dollar is up 0.1 versus the yen at 115.64, and the dollar is unchanged versus the yuan at 6.38. Aussie dollar is up 0.15%, just below 72. And the US dollar is down 0.2 versus the Canadian dollar, 126.19. And the Kiwi dollar is down 0.2 at 67.73. Quick look at the commodities. We got WTI crude up 0.4%, just below 79. High-grade copper is up 0.2% at 441.50. We've got natural gas, U.S. natural gas, up 4.5% at 402.50. And before I look at the 10-year yield, just wanted to show you how lumber is making a major comeback, as you can see here. Lumber, of course, had a huge run up last year in the first half of the year, and then it corrected back down, but now it's like going back up, and it looks like we could go and test the highs from last year. So let's have a look at the bond market and specifically the 10-year yield. We've seen that the bond market has had a really bad start to the year. Yields have gone up about 30 basis points, which is huge. So right now we're through the 1.77% level, which is probably a high for over a year. So not a good signal. Right now we're up almost 3 basis points, around 180. So there you go. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button. Please share it far and wide. Think about subscribing to my channel if you haven't yet. And you can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and all these other platforms below here. I wish you all a great day. Take care. Bye.